All right, then, let's take a deep dive, shall we? We've got a pretty hefty stack of PMLA documents here. The Act itself, the amendments, the guidelines, the whole works. Looks like you're really keen on getting a handle on these financial reporting requirements. And as a chartered accountant, well, let's just say I understand why. This stuff can be a bit much, but don't worry, we're going to break it down, make it all crystal clear, especially for someone in your shoes.
Absolutely. And I have to say, it's refreshing to see someone taking this as seriously as you are. Because believe me, understanding the PMLA, it's not just about ticking boxes on a checklist. It's about weaving that risk awareness into everything you do as a CA. It's about a mindset shift, really.
Exactly. I bet you're sitting there thinking, okay, I'm a numbers person, not some hotshot financial crime fighter. What's all the fuss about?
Right. It's not like every CA is out there rubbing elbows with, the Wolf of Wall Street.
Haha, exactly. But hey, here's the thing. The PMLA isn't picking on CAs. It's not saying you're the problem. It's more like recognizing that you, just by the nature of what you do, dealing with client finances day in and day out, well, you're in a unique position. It's like you've got a front row seat to spot anything fishy, any whiff of something suspicious. You're like a financial detective in a way.
Precisely. And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? Think of it this way, the PMLA, it's not just some random Indian law. It's part of a much bigger picture, a global effort to combat financial crime. It all started with those UN declarations,
Yeah.
the Financial Action Task Force setting the standards, urging countries to step up their game, and India's response, hold my chai, I've got this, enter the PMLA.
India's got this. I like that. So it's like the UN is the concerned parent saying, listen up, everyone. Money laundering is a serious issue. We got to work together on this. And India is the responsible one raising its hand. We're on it. We've got the PMLA.
Exactly.
But hold on, before we get ahead of ourselves,
Yeah.
talking about international crime-fighting task forces and all, let's rewind a bit. Let's start with the basics. What exactly is money laundering? When we say those words, what are we even talking about?
Yeah, it's not as straightforward as it sounds, is it? It's not like literally taking a stack of bills and running them through the washing machine. Though that would be a funny image, wouldn't it?
I can just picture it now.
Right. But in reality, it's more like this. Imagine a thief. They steal a priceless painting, right? They can't just waltz into an auction house and sell it openly. So they get creative. They create a series of transactions, maybe selling it to a shady art dealer who then sells it to a seemingly legitimate collector, and so on. The money changes hands a few times, different accounts, different countries, and poof, the trail goes cold. The origin of the money, the dirty money, it's been hidden, disguised to look like it came from legitimate sources. That's money laundering in a nutshell, making dirty money look clean.
So it's like giving dirty money a complete makeover, a new identity, so it can blend in with the clean money.
Exactly.
And we're not just talking about actual cash here, right?
Yeah.
It could be anything of value, anything gained from illegal activities, the PMLA calls it.
Proceeds of crime.
Right, proceeds of crime. And that could be, what, cash, obviously,
Yeah.
but also assets, property, even businesses.
You got it. Anything that can be used to break the link to that original crime, to make it harder to trace back to the source.
And this, my friend, is where things start to get really interesting for you, for CAs. Because guess what? The PMLA, it singles out certain professionals, including CAs, as reporting entities.
That's right.
And I can hear the alarm bells going off already.
Yeah.
But before you start picturing yourself reporting every single financial transaction, every cup of coffee, every auto rickshaw ride, let me stop you right there.
It's not about turning you into a full-time watchdog for every single rupee that passes through your hands.
Exactly. You're not joining the financial police force or anything. It's much more focused than that. It's about being vigilant, yes, but within the scope of your work as a CA.
Right. The PMLA isn't saying you have to look at every client interaction with suspicion. It's more about recognizing that some situations, some transactions, they just naturally carry a higher risk of being used for, shall we say, less than legal purposes. And in those situations, well, that's where you come in.
So it's not about being suspicious of everyone. It's about knowing when to be extra cautious.
Exactly.
And the PMLA, it doesn't leave you guessing either.
Yeah.
It lays out 5 specific activities that, if you're a CA involved in them, well, that's when those reporting obligations kick in. So should we dive into those?
Let's do it.
All right, number 1 on the list, we've got buying, selling, or managing companies. Now, this one's pretty self-explanatory, right? We've all heard those stories about shell companies, those mysterious entities that exist only on paper, used to hide money, dodge taxes, all sorts of shady dealings.
It's like playing a game of financial hide and seek, but the PMLA is handing you a flashlight and saying, all right, time to find those hidden players.
Love it. Okay, so that's number 1. What's next on the list of CA-specific activities?
Number 2 takes us to the world of real estate, always a popular choice for those looking to park their ill-gotten gains. We're talking about managing client funds related to buying and selling immovable property.
Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Real estate. It's tangible, it's relatively stable, and it's a great way to clean dirty money. Buy a fancy apartment, a beachfront villa, suddenly that shady cash looks a lot more legitimate.
Exactly. And the PMLA knows that CAs, you're often right in the thick of those transactions, managing funds, making sure everything is above board, at least on paper. So if you're dealing with a client who, let's say, suddenly wants to buy half the coastline with a suitcase full of cash, well, it's probably a good time to brush up on your PMLA knowledge.
Red flag city. All right, number 3 on the list seems a bit broader. Managing client assets. So we're not just talking about companies and real estate anymore. This sounds like it could be anything.
You're right. This one casts a wider net. We're talking about all sorts of assets here. Bank accounts, shares, investments, valuable art, vintage cars, you name it. The PMLA recognizes that CAs, you often have this bird's eye view of your client's finances. You see the whole picture, the good, the bad, and the potentially ugly. And that perspective, that's invaluable when it comes to spotting irregularities.
So you're like a financial hawk, circling above your client's financial portfolios, those sharp eyes peeled for anything that looks out of place.
Love that analogy.
All right, we're on a roll. 3 down, 2 to go. What's next on the PMLA's radar for CAs?
Number 4 brings us to management of client money.
Mhm.
Sounds a bit formal, doesn't it? But basically, it boils down to any situation where you're handling client funds for investments, savings, retirement planning, that sort of thing.
So if you're advising a client on their investment portfolio, helping them plan for the future, the PMLA wants to make sure you're doing it with your eyes wide open, right? It's about being a responsible steward of their wealth, making sure everything's being done by the book, above board, all that good stuff.
Precisely.
Okay, and last but not least, the 5th activity that puts CAs under the PMLA spotlight is
Acting as a trustee or managing a trust. Now, trusts, they've got a bit of a reputation, haven't they? A bit shrouded in secrecy, whispers of hidden fortunes, offshore accounts.
Yeah, trusts definitely have a certain mystique about them. And I think the PMLA recognizes that while most trusts are perfectly legitimate, they can sometimes be vulnerable to, shall we say, creative interpretations of the law.
Right, they can be a bit of a gray area, which is why it's so important for CAs to be aware of the potential risks and to take the appropriate precautions.
And this is where the ICAI, bless their hearts, has done some fantastic work in clarifying these obligations for CAs. They've gone above and beyond to make it crystal clear that this is not about turning every CA into a compliance officer for every client interaction. They've really hammered home the point that the PMLA is laser-focused on specific situations where you, as a CA, are carrying out a financial transaction on behalf of a client.
Exactly. The ICII's FAQs on this topic were a godsend, frankly. They provided some really helpful examples to illustrate what falls under the PMLA and what doesn't.
Because let's be honest, sometimes these legal definitions, they can be a bit, well, vague.
Right.
You need a good dose of real-world context. Examples are key. So give us one. Paint us a picture.
All right, imagine this. You're helping a client prepare their annual tax return. Pretty standard stuff for a CA, right? Now, that in itself wouldn't necessarily trigger those reporting obligations under the PMLA. You're providing a professional service, but you're not actually carrying out a financial transaction on their behalf.
You're not pushing any money around. You're just dealing with the numbers on paper.
Exactly. But now, let's say that same client, they come to you and say, hey, I'm starting a real estate investment company and I need you to manage all the finances. Well, now we're in a whole different ball game.
Because now you're not just crunching numbers on a tax return, you're stepping into a role where you're directly involved in those financial transactions. You're potentially handling large sums of money, dealing with complex ownership structures, all things that could raise those red flags in the context of money laundering.
And this is where that risk-based approach that we keep talking about becomes absolutely critical. The PMLA isn't about treating every client, every transaction with the same level of scrutiny. It's about recognizing that some situations just inherently carry a higher risk than others.
That's like having a risk-o-meter, right?
Hey.
You're constantly assessing the situation, turning those dials up or down based on what you see, and the higher the needle climbs, the more cautious you need to be.
Exactly. But we'll dive into the specifics of that risk-based approach a little later. For now, let's stick with the basics of being a reporting entity.
Sounds good to me. So what are the key things that CAs need to be aware of under the PMLA? What do they actually need to do?
Well, it all starts with really getting to know your client. And I'm not just talking about their favorite tea order or whether they prefer cricket or football. This is about digging a little deeper, going beyond the surface level. The PMLA calls it Know Your Customer, or KYC for short.
KYC. Got it. So it's more than just a formality, more than just collecting a few documents and ticking a box. It's about becoming a financial detective.
Right.
You're digging into their background, understanding their business, their financial history, what makes them tick financially.
You hit the nail on the head. It's like before you agree to manage someone's money, you want to make sure they haven't made a habit of making their money disappear.
Right. You don't want to be the last one to know that your client's idea of a venture capitalist involves a ski mask and a getaway car.
Exactly. And speaking of detectives, just like a good detective keeps detailed notes, so you. The PMLA is big on record keeping.
So we're talking documenting the nature of the transaction, the amounts involved, the dates, who's involved, all that good stuff.
The more detail, the better. And it's not just about bureaucracy or keeping your inner auditor happy. These records, they serve a very important purpose. If questions ever arise, if a transaction raises a red flag down the line, you've got the evidence to back up your actions, to demonstrate that you did your due diligence, that you were following the rules.
Because if there's one thing we know about the PMLA, it's that they don't mess around when it comes to non-compliance. Those penalties, they can be hefty.
Exactly. We're talking hefty fines, legal action, the works. It's not something you want to take lightly.
So it's not just about protecting your clients, it's about protecting yourself and your practice as well.
100%.
Okay, so we've got KYC, we've got record keeping. Those are two crucial pillars of compliance. But there's one more big one, right? The thing that every CA working under the PMLA needs to be prepared for, that moment when they might have to.
Report suspicious activity.
Exactly. The PMLA expects you to be vigilant, to be proactive in identifying and reporting anything that sets off those alarm bells. And that's where those suspicious transaction reports, those STRs as they're often called, come into play.
And I know, it can feel a bit intimidating at first, right? Like, who am I to say this is suspicious? What if I'm wrong? But here's the thing. Reporting a suspicious transaction, it's not about pointing fingers or playing judge and jury. It's about fulfilling your legal obligation and contributing to the bigger picture, the fight against financial crime. Think of it like this. You're that person who sees something a little off, something that just doesn't sit right, and you alert the authorities. You might not have all the answers. You might not know for sure if it's truly criminal activity, but you're raising the flag. You're saying, hey, someone needs to take a closer look at this.
Something's fishy here.
Exactly. And you're not expected to be an expert in every type of financial crime or to be able to sniff out a money launderer from a mile away. The ICAI, they provide tons of guidance on what to look for, common red flags, how to tell the difference between a legitimate transaction and one that needs a closer look. They've even got those specific examples, like if you see this, then do that. It's actually quite helpful.
It's like they've created a financial crime fighting handbook for CEAs.
Right. And if you're ever unsure, if you're on the fence about something, you can always reach out to the ICAI for guidance.
Pick up the phone. Hey, ICAI, I'm seeing some unusual activity here. Should I be worried?
Exactly. They're like the PMLA helpline for CAs. Now, speaking of help, the PMLA also recognizes that statutory bodies like the ICAI, the ICSI, the ICMAI, they all have a crucial role to play in supporting their members. It's not just about setting the rules and then stepping back. It's about providing guidance, offering support, being there for their members every step of the way.
It's a team effort, right? The PMLA sets the ground rules, the statutory bodies provide the coaching and support, and CAs like yourself are out there on the field putting those rules into action, making sure the game is played fairly.
Beautifully put. And one of the most important things those statutory bodies do is emphasize that risk-based approach we keep talking about. Remember that riskometer.
How can I forget? It's like my new favorite tool.
Right. Well, the ICAI and those other organizations, they get it. They understand that not all clients are created equal when it comes to risk.
You're telling me a small business owner, a local shopkeeper, they're probably not laundering millions of rupees from illegal arms deals.
Probably not. But a company operating in a high-risk jurisdiction, one with a super complicated ownership structure that involves a dozen shell corporations, well, that might warrant a closer look, wouldn't you say?
Just a tad. So it's back to that riskometer, right? The higher the needle climbs, the more cautious you need to be.
Exactly. And that's where those enhanced due diligence measures come in. It's like KYC, but on steroids.
Okay, now you've got my attention. Enhanced due diligence. Tell me more.
All right, imagine this. You've got a client who's involved in international trade, importing luxury goods. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, right? But it's a sector that's often associated with money laundering. So, in addition to your standard KYC checks, you might dig a little deeper. For example, you might want to independently verify the source of funds for those transactions. Don't just take their word for it, actually check it out.
So if they say, oh, this money came from a loan, you might want to actually see that loan agreement. Maybe have a little chat with the lender, make sure everything adds up.
Exactly. Or you might scrutinize the background and reputation of the other parties involved in those transactions. Who are they doing business with? Are there any red flags associated with those entities?
So it's like doing a background check on a business partner. But instead of looking for criminal records, you're looking for financial red flags, links to suspicious activities, that sort of thing.
Precisely. You might also pay close attention to the pricing and volume of those transactions. Are the goods being imported at unusually high or low prices? Is the volume of trade consistent with their stated business activities?
Again, it's all about looking for those clues, those subtle hints that something might be amiss. It's like being a financial detective.
You're getting it. And finally, you might even consider using specialized databases or tools. There are some really sophisticated ones out there that can help identify heightened risk factors. Things like involvement in high-risk countries, links to organized crime, or politically exposed persons.
Wow, so it's really about being thorough, being resourceful, knowing where to look for those red flags, and then knowing what to do when you find them. And this is where having access to those resources and guidance from the ICAI and those other statutory bodies, that's invaluable.
Absolutely. They provide practical advice on how to actually implement those enhanced due diligence measures, how to assess risk effectively, and how to document your findings in a way that shows you're in compliance. Because at the end of the day, it's not just about knowing the rules, it's about knowing how to apply them in the real world, in those messy, complex situations where the lines aren't always so clear.
And that, I think, is what makes the role of a CA so crucial in this whole fight against financial crime. You're not just number crunchers, you're guardians of financial integrity.
Well said.
You're the eyes and ears of the financial system. And your vigilance, your expertise, your commitment to ethical conduct, it's all essential to keeping the playing field level for everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Now, before we move on, there's one more thing I want to touch upon. We've talked a lot about the current state of the PMLA. But the world of finance, it's not exactly known for standing still, is it? Technology is changing everything, and I can't help but wonder how these trends, things like cryptocurrencies, online transactions, the whole globalization of finance, how are they impacting the fight against money laundering? And what does it mean for CAs trying to navigate the PMLA in this rapidly changing landscape?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that every CA should be asking themselves. Because as technology reshapes the way we do business, it also creates new opportunities for financial crime. It's like a constant game of cat and mouse.
Right. As soon as we develop new ways to prevent money laundering, the criminals are already finding new loopholes to exploit.
Exactly. And that's why it's more important than ever for CAs to stay informed, to be aware of those emerging trends, and to never stop learning.
It's like that old saying, right?
Yeah.
The only constant is change. And in the world of finance, well, that couldn't be more true, especially with all this technology constantly shaking things up.
Absolutely. And for CAs, that means continuous learning is non-negotiable. It's not a nice to have, it's a must do. Luckily, the ICA gets it. They've got a whole bunch of resources, continuing education programs, all laser focused on AML/CFT compliance.
Okay, so step one, stay updated. But let's get practical for a second. How can CAs actually take those evolving technologies, those fancy new tools, and use them to, up their game when it comes to risk assessment?
Now you're talking. This is where it gets really exciting. Think about data analytics for a second. It's already changing the game when it comes to analyzing financial information. CAs, they can use those same tools to supercharge their KYC and due diligence processes. Imagine being able to sift through mountains of client data, spot patterns, flag those potential risks, all in real time. No more late nights hunched over spreadsheets.
It's like having X-ray vision, but for finance. You can see right through those complex layers of transactions. No more hiding for those shady dealings.
Exactly. And this is just the tip of the iceberg, really. As technologies like AI and machine learning, they keep getting smarter, they've got the potential to completely revolutionize how we detect and prevent financial crime.
So you're saying the future of AML/CFT compliance, it might involve CAs teaming up with AI, like some kind of financial crime fighting duo?
Yeah.
The technology does the heavy lifting when it comes to data, and the CA provides the human touch, the intuition, the years of experience.
Now you're getting it. It's about harnessing the power of technology, but not letting it replace that human element, that ethical core, that gut feeling that CAs bring to the table. And that, I think, is a key takeaway for every CA listening right now. The PMLA, it might seem like this big, scary piece of legislation, but at its heart, it's really about empowering you. It's about giving you the tools and the knowledge to be a more responsible, a more vigilant, and yes, a more tech-savvy financial professional.
It's about recognizing that the fight against financial crime, it's not a one-and-done deal. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And it requires constant adaptation, innovation, and, yeah, collaboration, too.
Couldn't have put it better myself. And here's the thing, you're not alone in this. You've got the ICAI, those other statutory bodies, and a whole global network of professionals all fighting the good fight. We're all in this together, striving for that safer, more transparent, more accountable financial world.
Like a global financial crime-fighting league. I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
Okay, we've covered a ton of ground here. We went from unpacking those dense PMLA documents to, like, gazing into the future of financial crime fighting. But before we wrap things up, let's give our listeners something to chew on, something to spark those curious minds. What do you say?
Oh, I like where you're going with this. All right, how about this? As technology keeps breaking down those geographical barriers and financial transactions become even more globalized, how will international cooperation in the fight against money laundering need to evolve? What new challenges, what new opportunities will pop up in a world where financial crime, it can zip across borders with a click of a button?
It's a whole new world out there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's changing faster than ever.
You said it. And those changes, they're not just creating new opportunities for businesses, they're opening up new avenues for financial crime too.
Exactly. So how do we, as in, the good guys, how do we stay ahead of the curve?
Well, the first step is acknowledging that the old ways of doing things, they might not cut it anymore. We need to embrace those new technologies, those cutting-edge tools, and use them to our advantage.
Okay, so what, we give all the CAs out there a crash course in cybersecurity and send them on their way?
Haha, not quite. But it does start with education, with making sure CAs have access to the knowledge and the training they need to navigate this new landscape.
Right, because ignorance is not bliss when it comes to financial crime.
Tell me about it. But it's not just about understanding the technology itself, it's about knowing how to use it effectively. Take data analytics, for instance.
Data analytics, you mean like those algorithms that can predict what you're going to buy on Amazon before you even know you want it?
Exactly. Those same principles, they can be applied to the world of finance. Imagine being able to analyze massive amounts of financial data, client transactions, all of it, and then being able to spot those subtle patterns, those tiny red flags that might otherwise go unnoticed. That's the power of data analytics.
So it's like having a superpowered financial detective, right? One that can connect the dots, see the bigger picture, all in a fraction of the time it would take a human.
Precisely. And as those technologies continue to evolve, so too will our ability to detect and prevent financial crime. It's an exciting time to be in this field, really.
It sounds like it. But I have to admit, part of me worries that we're heading towards a future where the machines take over, where it's all algorithms and AI calling the shots, and the human element, that gut feeling, that intuition that's so crucial in detecting financial crime, that gets lost in the shuffle.
I understand your concern, I really do. But here's the thing. I believe that technology, it's not here to replace us. It's here to augment us, to enhance our abilities. The best AML/CFT professionals of the future, they're not going to be the ones who shy away from technology. They're going to be the ones who embrace it, who learn to work alongside it, who use it as a tool to enhance their own expertise.
So it's not about man versus machine. It's about man with machine.
Now you're getting it. It's about finding that synergy, that sweet spot where technology and human expertise, they complement each other, they make each other stronger. And that, I think, is a powerful message for all the CAs out there.
Embrace the future, but don't lose sight of what makes you human.
Exactly. Never stop learning, never stop questioning, and never, ever underestimate the power of your own intuition.
Beautifully said. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on, don't you?
Couldn't agree more.
We've covered a lot of ground today. From the nitty-gritty of the PMLA to the exciting future of financial crime fighting. And if there's one thing I hope our listeners take away from this conversation, it's that knowledge is power. The more you know about the PMLA, about the risks, about the tools at your disposal, the better equipped you'll be to protect yourself, your clients, and the integrity of the financial system as a whole.
Hear, hear.
It's been a pleasure diving into this topic with you. Always a fascinating conversation.
The feeling is mutual. Always happy to geek out about financial crime fighting.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it informative, insightful, and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay ahead of the curve.